I never thought I'd end up in this situation. Honestly, for years I believed that stories like mine happened to other people in other lives, in movies or gossip columns. Not to me. My name is Sarah, and I always thought I had the perfect life. I had a loving husband, Daniel, whom I adored, and a best friend, Jennifer, who had been by my side since high school. We were inseparable, practically sisters. We shared everything, secrets, heartbreaks, triumphs, and I trusted both of them completely. That trust is what made what happened next so devastating. It all started with subtle shifts, the kind you almost convince yourself you're imagining. Daniel began working late more often, and when I asked him about it, he'd smile and tell me it was just extra projects, deadlines, nothing to worry about. Jennifer, my best friend, started acting differently too, more flirtatious, more protective of Daniel, as if she were guarding him in ways that made me uneasy. But I pushed it aside, told myself I was being paranoid, that maybe I was just overthinking. After all, I had no reason to doubt either of them. Life went on. I tried to stay busy, focusing on my career and home and spending what time I could with Jennifer. We laughed together, shared meals, and had long nights talking about everything and nothing. But little by little, the tiny doubts in the back of my mind began to gnaw at me. Daniel would leave his phone face down on the kitchen counter or walk out of the room when it buzzed. I told myself I shouldn't care, but I couldn't ignore the pit in my stomach. Then one Saturday afternoon, everything changed. Daniel said he had a meeting in town, something about a client presentation. He left early, kissed me on the cheek, and smiled. I decided to go visit Jennifer afterward, thinking we could catch up over coffee. When I got to her apartment, something felt off. The door was slightly ajar. I called her name. No answer. My heart began to race, and a tiny voice inside me whispered, "Maybe don't go in." But curiosity, or maybe a sense of dread, drove me forward. I stepped inside, calling her name again. The apartment was quiet, almost eerily so. And then I saw them. Daniel and Jennifer sitting close on the couch, whispering to each other, their hands brushing in ways that made my chest tighten. They looked up at me, startled, and in that moment I felt the world tilt. Every laugh, every glance between them screamed betrayal. I froze, unable to breathe. My mind couldn't process what I was seeing. I wanted to scream, to run, to grab my car keys and disappear, but I couldn't move. Jennifer's face went pale. "Sarah," she began, but the word caught in her throat. Daniel stood, stammering, and for the first time I saw him for who he really was, not the man I had married, but someone who had made choices that cut through everything I believed about love and loyalty. I didn't wait to hear excuses. I left. I didn't speak. I didn't turn back. I drove aimlessly, gripping the steering wheel, tears blurring my vision. The street seemed endless, and with every mile the reality of their betrayal sunk deeper. Over the next few days I tried to process what happened. I questioned everything, my judgment, my intuition, even myself. Had I missed the signs? Was there something I could have done differently? The answers weren't coming, and that only made the pain sharper. I realized that I needed to confront them, not out of anger, but to reclaim my power and understand what had happened. When I finally faced them, it was in a neutral place, a small cafe where no one would judge or intervene. Jennifer broke down immediately, apologizing over and over. Daniel tried to justify himself, blaming stress, work, and even me in some twisted way. But I stayed calm. I spoke slowly, letting each word land. "I trusted both of you. You broke that trust. I deserve better than this." It wasn't a scene of shouting or dramatic confrontation. It was me taking back control of my life, my dignity, and my choices. I spent weeks afterward reflecting on everything. I journaled, I cried, I exercised, and I leaned on friends and family for support. Slowly, I began to understand that betrayal, while painful, doesn't define you. Your response does. I started rebuilding my life, focusing on myself, my happiness, and my sense of self-worth. That's how it began, the unraveling of a life I thought was perfect, and the start of a journey I never expected. Painful, yes, but ultimately empowering. And that's when I learned the first lesson: trust your instincts. When something feels wrong, don't ignore it. Even if the truth is hard, it's always better than living in denial. After that confrontation, I thought the worst of it would be over. I told myself I could move forward, that I could somehow rebuild my life without letting their betrayal define me. But life has a way of testing you in ways you never anticipate. In the weeks that followed, I began noticing subtle reminders of what had happened. Daniel's messages on social media, tagged photos of him and Jennifer from months before that suddenly felt like evidence I'd never wanted to see, and the creeping realization that the world could be cruel in ways I hadn't prepared for. One evening I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of it all. How could someone I loved and trusted so completely, the person I had built my dreams with, betray me in such a calculated, intimate way? And Jennifer, my best friend, the one person I thought would always have my back, the person I confided in when life was too heavy to bear, had crossed a line I couldn't imagine being crossed. My heart ached, not only from anger and sadness, but from a profound sense of loss. I realized that moving forward wasn't just about cutting Daniel and Jennifer out of my life. It was about understanding why this had happened, and more importantly, what I could do to prevent it from breaking me entirely. I started documenting my feelings in a journal. Every emotion, every flash of anger, every pang of hurt, I wrote it down. Writing became my therapy. It was like slowly unpacking a box filled with shards of glass, painful, but necessary to sort through, so I wouldn't carry the cuts with me forever. Friends and family noticed the change in me. They reached out more often, offering support in ways I hadn't realized I needed. I began sharing small parts of what happened carefully with those I trusted. Each time I told the story, it hurt a little less. I started to see that while betrayal is devastating, isolation is worse. Connection and support became my lifeline. Meanwhile, Daniel tried reaching out. He sent texts, emails, even a handwritten note. At first I ignored them. I couldn't bear to read them. But eventually I allowed myself to see what he had to say. His words were full of apologies, promises to change, confessions of guilt, and pleas for forgiveness. But I read them with a careful, guarded heart. I realized that no amount of words could erase what had been done. Actions matter, not promises. And even if he meant some of it, it was no longer my responsibility to fix him. I also had to confront Jennifer. The thought of seeing her again made my chest tighten, but I knew that avoiding her forever wouldn't necessarily heal the wound. When we finally met, I could see the regret in her eyes. She apologized repeatedly, each time sounding genuine, but the words felt insufficient. I asked her questions I needed answers to: why it happened, how she could betray me like that, why she had let our friendship unravel in favor of something so destructive. She answered honestly, hesitantly, but the truth was still bitter. I learned something important in that conversation. People make choices, and sometimes those choices hurt others deeply. But acknowledging wrongs is different from undoing them. Jennifer could apologize, Daniel could regret, but my healing depended on me, not them. I had to take responsibility for my own recovery, my own happiness. As weeks turned into months, I began finding small ways to reclaim my life. I focused on work, personal growth, and reconnecting with passions I had neglected. I took long walks, read books that inspired me, and practiced meditation to calm the racing thoughts that haunted me. Each day was a small victory. The pain was still there, yes, but it became a background noise instead of a deafening roar. I also began to notice how much stronger I was becoming. Strength doesn't come from avoiding pain, it comes from surviving it, from learning from it, and from refusing to let it define you. I realized that my life wasn't over, it was simply entering a new chapter. A chapter where I would define the terms, where I would choose who had access to my heart and my trust. And that, I realized, was liberating in a way I hadn't imagined when I first discovered their betrayal. By the time I reached the end of that month, I had made a decision. I would forgive, not because I had to, but because holding on to anger was like carrying a weight I didn't need. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean excusing what happened. It means choosing freedom over resentment. And in that choice, I found the first real glimpse of peace since that day on the couch when my world tilted sideways. Over time, I started noticing subtle changes in myself that I hadn't expected. I laughed more easily, I slept better, and the anxiety that had once tightened around my chest like a vice slowly loosened. I realized that healing doesn't happen overnight. It isn't about forgetting or pretending the pain didn't exist. It's about choosing every day to live fully despite it. Each morning, I made a conscious decision to put myself first, to prioritize my happiness and my well-being above fear, anger, or resentment. I reconnected with old friends, started pursuing hobbies I had abandoned, and even allowed myself small indulgences that I had long denied. Painting became a new outlet, something I could lose myself in for hours. Running became my therapy, the rhythm of my feet against the pavement grounding me in the present. I discovered that strength isn't loud or flashy, it's quiet, consistent, and deeply personal. Months passed, and eventually I ran into Jennifer again, not planned, not orchestrated, but a chance encounter in a park we had once frequented together. The sight of her made my chest tighten, but this time it wasn't fear or rage. It was a reminder of how far I had come. We talked cautiously, carefully. She apologized again sincerely, and I realized I no longer needed to let that pain define our interaction. Forgiveness isn't about them, it's about freeing yourself. We didn't become best friends again overnight, but we found a new equilibrium, one built on boundaries, honesty, and mutual respect. Daniel reached out once more, months later, hoping to explain, to apologize, to reconnect. I listened briefly with empathy but without attachment. I realized I didn't owe him my emotions or my attention. The man I had loved had made choices that proved he wasn't the partner I deserved. That realization was painful but liberating. It allowed me to finally close the door without bitterness or regret. Reflecting on everything, I understood that life has a way of teaching you lessons in the harshest possible ways. Betrayal, heartbreak, and disappointment are painful, but they also illuminate your own strength. They force you to confront what you value most and to establish boundaries that protect your heart. I learned that love is powerful, but self-love is transformative. If you don't prioritize your own worth, no one else will. Now, when I look back, I don't dwell on the betrayal. I think about the lessons it taught me, the importance of trusting your instincts, of listening to your gut when something feels wrong, and of never allowing someone else's choices to determine your self-worth. I learned that true happiness isn't dependent on anyone else. It comes from within, from resilience, from understanding that life doesn't end when people fail you, it begins anew. I also discovered a surprising truth. Sometimes the people who hurt you the most teach you the lessons you need to become your strongest, most authentic self. I could have stayed bitter, angry, and broken. I could have let that betrayal define my life, but I chose a different path, one of growth, self-respect, and gratitude for the strength I found within myself. Today, I live intentionally. I nurture relationships that honor me, and I've built a life where honesty, loyalty, and love are reciprocal, not conditional. I share my story not to shame anyone, but to remind anyone listening that you are stronger than your circumstances. You have the power to heal, to forgive, and to create a future that doesn't rely on anyone else's choices. You are the author of your own life. And so that's my story, the story of betrayal, heartbreak, and ultimately empowerment. I caught my husband cheating with my best friend, and it hurt more than I ever thought possible. But I survived, I healed, and I came out stronger on the other side. Because sometimes life's harshest lessons are the ones that teach you the most profound truths about yourself, that your happiness is yours to claim, your heart is yours to protect, and your life is yours to live fully, no matter what anyone else does.